Ken Rawlings. Here we go. Just follow along. If you've got a question, raise your hand. Be prepared to to answer questions as we proceed. The orphanage is high in the Carolina mountains. Sometimes in winter, the snowdrifts are so deep that the institution is cut off from the village below, from all the world. I don't know why I just didn't give you one of those. Let me ask you something. What's the setting? It's part of it. It's not all of it. In the winter. That's right. Orphanage in the Carolina mountains in the winter. So we've talked all year. Now look, next week when you guys have your test for English, your state test, the setting is likely to be at the very beginning, just like I've shown y'all all year. Okay? So if there's a setting question, it's likely to be right there. Let's keep going. Fog hides the mountain peaks. The snow swirls down the valleys, and a wind blows so bitterly that the orphanage boys who take the milk twice daily to the baby cottage reach the door with fingers stiff in agony of numbness. Or when we carry trays from the cookhouse for the ones that are sick, Jerry said, we get our faces frostbit because we can't put our hands over them. I have gloves, he added. Some of the boys don't have any. He liked the late spring, he said. The rhododendron was in bloom, a carpet of color across the mountainsides, soft as the May winds that stirred the hemlocks. He called it laurel. It's pretty when the laurel blooms, he said. Some of it's pink and some of it's white. I was there in the autumn. I wanted quiet, isolation, to do some troublesome writing. I wanted mountain air to blow out the malaria from too long a time in the subtropics. I was homesick, too, for the flaming of maples in October and for corn shocks and pumpkins and black walnut trees and the lift of hills. I found them all living in a cabin that belonged to the orphanage, half a mile beyond the orphanage farm. When I took the cabin, I asked for a boy or man to come and chop wood for the fireplace. The first few days were warm. I found what wood I needed about the cabin. No one came, and I forgot the order. I looked up from my typewriter one late afternoon, a little startled. A boy stood at the door, and my pointer dog, my companion, was at his side and had not barked to warn me. The boy was probably 12 years old, but undersized. He wore overalls and a torn shirt and was barefooted. He said, I can chop some wood today. I said, but I have a boy coming from the orphanage. I'm the boy. You? But you're small. Size don't matter, chopping wood, he said. Some of the big boys don't chop good. I've been chopping wood at the orphanage a long time. I visualized mangled and inadequate branches for my fires. I was well into my work and not inclined to conversation. I was a little blunt. Very well, there's the axe. Go ahead and see what you can do. So when she first sees Jerry, when the narrator, by the way, we never find the narrator's name out, okay? When the narrator first sees Jerry, is she impressed with him?
No.
Not at all. She thinks he's a scrawny runt. She thinks he's not even good enough to chop wood, okay? But she really doesn't feel like being bothered, so she's like, there's the axe. Go cut the wood. I'm going to go back to doing what I was doing. And she thinks to herself, I'll have to get somebody else later. Let's keep going. I went back to work, closing the door. At first, the sound of the boy dragging brush annoyed me. Then he began to chop. The blows were rhythmic and steady, and shortly I had forgotten him. The sound no more of an interruption than a consistent rain. I suppose an hour and a half passed, for when I stopped and stretched and heard the boy's steps on the cabin stoop, the sun was dropping behind the farthest mountain, and the valleys were purple with something deeper than the asters. The boy said, I have to go to supper now. I can come again tomorrow evening. I said, I'll pay you now for what you've done, thinking I should probably have to insist on an older boy. 10 cents an hour? Anything is all right. We went together back of the cabin. An astonishing amount of solid wood had been cut. There were cherry logs and heavy roots of rhododendron and blocks from the waste pine and oak left from the building of the cabin. But you've done as much of as a man. I said, this is a splendid pile. I looked at him actually for the first time. His hair was the color of the corn shocks, and his eyes, very direct, were like the mountain sky when rain is pending, gray with a shadow of that miraculous blue. As I spoke, a light came over him, as though the setting sun had touched him with the suffused glory with which it touched the mountains. I gave him a quarter. "You may come tomorrow," I said, "and thank you very much." He looked at me and at the coin and seemed to want to speak, but could not, and turned away. I'll split kindling. You need to see me? I'll be back. I'm recording this lesson.
I need your seating chart for safety.
Yeah, I haven't done it. Let's keep going. "I'll split kindling tomorrow," he said over his thin, ragged shoulder. "You'll need kindling and medium wood and logs and backlogs." Let's stop there. Go back to the previous page. It says, we went together back of the cabin. An astonishing amount of wood had been cut. What does the word astonishing mean? Yeah, surprising. Like to be astonished is like just to be amazed. Yeah, to be completely surprised. Very good. And then she used the word splendid. She said, "This is a splendid pile." What does the word splendid mean? What's it mean?
Amazing.
Yeah, it's just incredible. This is amazing. It's wonderful. Let's keep going. Next page. At daylight, I was half weakened by the sound of chopping. Again, it was so even in texture that I went back to sleep. When I left my bed in the cool morning, the boy had come and gone, and a stack of kindling was neat against the cabin wall. He came after school in the afternoon and worked until time to return to the orphanage. His name was Jerry. He was 12 years old, and he had been at the orphanage since he was 4. I could picture him at 4, with the same grave, gray-blue eyes and the same independence. No, the word that comes to me is integrity. What's integrity, Georgia? Yeah, it means honesty. Integrity is like doing the right thing when no one else is looking. That's integrity. The word means something very special to me, and the quality for which I use it is a rare one. My father had it. There is another of whom I am almost sure, but almost no man of my acquaintance possesses it with the clarity, the purity, the simplicity of a mountain stream. But the boy Jerry had it. It is bedded on courage, but it is more than brave. It is honest, but it is more than honesty. The axe handle broke one day. Jerry said the wood shop at the orphanage would repair it. I brought money to pay for the job, and he refused it. "I'll pay for it," he said. I broke it. I brought the axe down careless. "But no one hits accurately every time," I told him. "The fault was in the wood of the handle. I'll see the man from whom I bought it." It was only then that he would take the money. He was standing back of his own carelessness. He was a free will agent, and he chose to do careful work. And if he failed, he took the responsibility without subterfuge. Well, there's our word, subterfuge. Okay, so you had a question about that. Subterfuge means without placing blame without making an excuse, without blaming someone else or something else. To take the blame without subterfuge means to accept the responsibility of it. And he did for me the unnecessary thing, the gracious thing that we find done only by the great of heart. Things no training can teach, for they are done on the instant with no predicated experience. He found a cubbyhole beside the fireplace that I had not noticed. There, of his own accord, he put kindling and medium wood, so that I might always have dry fire material ready in case of sudden wet weather. A stone was loose in the rough walk to the cabin. He dug a deeper hole and steadied it, although he came himself by a shortcut over the bank. I found that when I tried to return his thoughtfulness with such things as candy and apples, he was wordless. "Thank you" was perhaps an expression for which he had had no use, for his courtesy was instinctive. He only looked at the gift and at me, and a curtain lifted, so that I saw deep into the clear well of his eyes, and gratitude was there, and affection, soft over the firm granite of his character. He made simple excuses to come and sit with me. Let's look at that sentence. Michael, this is for you. I like your mask, by the way.
Thank you.
He made simple excuses to come and sit with me. What's that mean? He made simple excuses to come and sit with me?
He wanted to come go and see her, and so he made
Anything he could think of, no matter how big or small, he just came up with some excuse to go and hang out at her house. Probably a lot better than hanging out at the orphanage, huh? I could no more have turned him away than if he had been physically hungry. I suggested once that the best time for us to visit was just before supper, when I left off my writing. After that, he waited always until my typewriter had been some time quiet. One day I worked until nearly dark. I went outside the cabin, having forgotten him. I saw him going up over the hill in the twilight toward the orphanage. When I sat down on my stoop, a place was warm from his body where he had been sitting. So he went to see her one night, and what did she do?
Kept typing.
Huh?
She kept typing.
That's not the right answer.
Oh.
Think harder. She was typing, but what is she saying? She forgot. She forgot about him. What's that let us know about her?
She's self-assault.
She's a pretty self-centered person. Okay? She's pretty self-centered. I mean, think about it. If somebody said, hey, come over at 6. You went to their house at 6 and they knocked on the door, and you knocked on the door and they didn't answer. That wouldn't be cool, right? Now, granted, he didn't knock on the door because he didn't want to disturb her. He could hear her working, but he kind of sat out there and waited, and she never was like, oh, yeah, Jerry's coming over. That's not cool. He became intimate, of course, with my pointer, Pat. There is a strange communion between a boy and a dog. Perhaps they possess the same singleness of spirit, the same kind of wisdom. It is difficult to explain, but it exists. When I went across the state for a weekend, I left the dog in Jerry's charge. I gave him the dog whistle and the key to the cabin and left sufficient food. He was to come 2 or 3 times a day and let out the dog, feed and exercise him. I should return Sunday night, and Jerry would take out the dog for the last time Sunday afternoon and then leave the key under an agreed hiding place. My return was belated, and fog filled the mountain passes so treacherously that I dared not drive at night. The fog held the next morning, and it was Monday, noon, before I reached the cabin. The dog had been fed and cared for that morning. Jerry came early in the afternoon, anxious. The superintendent said nobody would drive in the fog, he said. I came just before bedtime last night, and you hadn't come. So I brought Pat some of my breakfast this morning. I wouldn't have let anything happen to him. I was sure of that. I didn't worry. When I heard about the fog, I thought you'd know. So this kid, the lady was late getting back, a day, didn't get back to the next day, and she didn't leave enough food for the dog, which, by the way, is pretty foolish. I mean, don't you think you should always leave a little extra? That's kind of common sense. Kind of like when you're taking a trip, my advice is you better bring a few extra outfits, right? Anyway, well, she didn't leave enough food for the dog, and he had run out of food. What did Jerry do? Yeah, Jerry gave the dog his own food. He was needed for work at the orphanage, and he had to return at once. I gave him $1 in payment, and he looked at it and went away. But that night, he came in the darkness and knocked at the door. Come on in, Jerry, I said, if you're allowed to be away this late. I told maybe a story, he said. I told him I thought you would want to see me. When he says I told a story, what does it mean I told a story?
You lie.
Yeah, a lie. Did your parents ever say that, or your grandparents? Don't be telling stories. Have y'all ever heard that phrasing?
Yeah.
That's old school stuff. My grandmother used to say it. My parents don't say it. I think it's like something from the Depression or something. That's true, I assured him, and I saw his relief. I want to hear about how you managed with the dog. He sat by the fire with me with no other light and told me of their 2 days together. The dog lay close to him and found a comfort there that I did not have for him. And it seemed to me that being with my dog and caring for him had brought the boy and me, too, together, so that he felt that he belonged to me as well as to the animal. He stayed right with me, he told me, except when he ran in the laurel. He likes the laurel. I took him up over the hill and we both ran fast. There was a place where the grass was high and I lay down in it and hid. I could hear Pat hunting for me. He found my trail and he barked. When he found me, he acted crazy, ran around and around me in circles. We watched the flames. That's an apple log, he said. It burns the prettiest of any wood. We were very close. He was suddenly impelled to speak of things he had not spoken of before, nor had I cared to ask him. You look a little bit like my mother, he said, especially in the dark, by the fire. But you were only 4, Jerry, when you came here. You've remembered how she looks all these years? My mother lives in Mannville, he said.
Roll credits.
For a moment, finding that he had a mother shocked me as greatly as anything in my life has ever done, and I did not know why it disturbed me. Then I understood my distress. I was filled with a passionate resentment that any woman should go away and leave her son. Kellen, what's this lady's emotion when Jerry tells her that his mom is alive?
I'm mad.
She's pretty angry about it. Yeah. A fresh anger added itself. Oh, there's the next thing. A son like this one. The orphanage was a wholesome place. The executives were kind, good people. The food was more than adequate. The boys were healthy. A ragged shirt was no hardship, nor the doing of clean labor. Granted, perhaps, that the boy felt no lack. What blood fed the bowels of a woman who did not yearn over this child's lean body that had come in parturition out of her own? At 4, he would have looked the same as now. Nothing, I thought, nothing in life could change those eyes. His quality must be apparent to an idiot, a fool. I burned with questions I could not ask. In any, I was afraid there would be pain. Have you seen her, Jerry, lately? I see her every summer. She sends for me. I wanted to cry out, why are you not with her? How can she let you go away again? Espen, you're about to be out in the hall. You make one more noise, you're out. You understand me?
I understand.
Okay. He said, she comes up here from Mannville whenever she can. She doesn't have a job now. His face shone in the firelight. She wanted to give me a puppy, but they can't let one boy keep a puppy. You remember the suit I had on last Sunday? He was plainly proud. She sent me that for Christmas. The Christmas before that, he drew a long breath, savoring the memory. She sent me a pair of skates. Roller skates? My mind was busy making pictures of her, trying to understand her. She had not then entirely deserted or forgotten him. But why then, I thought? I must not condemn her without knowing. Roller skates. I let the other boys use them. They're always borrowing them, but they're careful of them. What circumstances other than poverty? I'm going to take the dollar you gave me for taking care of Pat, he said, and buy her a pair of gloves. I could only say, that will be nice. Do you know her size? I think it's 8.5, he said. He looked at my hands. Do you wear an 8.5? He asked. No, I wear a smaller size, a 6. Oh, then I guess her hands are bigger than yours. I hated her. Poverty or no, there was other food than bread, and the soul could starve as quickly as the body. He was taking his dollar to buy gloves for her big, stupid hands, and she lived away from him in Mannville and contented herself with sending him skates. She likes white gloves, he said. Do you think I can get them for $1? I think so, I said. I decided that I should not leave the mountain without seeing her and knowing for myself why she had done this thing. The human mind scatters its interests as though made of thistledown, and every wind stirs and moves it. I finished my work. It did not please me, and I gave my thoughts to another field. I should need some Mexican material. I made arrangements to close my Florida place, Mexico immediately, and doing the writing there if conditions were favorable. Then Alaska with my brother. After that, heaven knew what or where. I did not take time to go to Mannville to see Jerry's mother, nor even to talk with the orphanage officials about her. I was a trifle abstracted about the boy because of my work and plans, and after my first fury at her, We did not speak of her again. His having a mother, any sort of all not far away, in Mannville, relieved me of the ache I had had about him. He did not question the anomalous relation. He was not lonely. It was none of my concern. He came every day and cut the wood and did small helpful favors and stayed to talk. The days had become cold, and often I let him come inside the cabin. He would lie on the floor in front of the fire with with one arm across the pointer, and they would doze off and wait quietly for me. Other days they ran with a common ecstasy through the laurel, and since the asters were now gone, he brought me back vermilion maple leaves and chestnut boughs dripping with imperial yellow. I was ready to go. I said to him, "You have been my friend, Jerry. I shall often think of you and miss you. Pat will miss you too. I am leaving tomorrow." He did not answer. When he went away, I remember that a new moon hung over the mountain, and I watched him go in silence up the hill. Kaylee, what's his emotional reaction when she tells him that she's leaving?
He's upset.
Yes. He's sad. He doesn't even say anything. It hurts his feelings so bad. It says he was silent. He did not answer. He didn't know what to say. Not to mention he's going to take the dog, right? The one that he, by the way, cares more for than she does. Then it says, I expected him the next day, but he did not come. The details of packing my personal belongings, loading my car, arranging the bed over the seat where my dog would ride, occupied me until late in the day. I closed the cabin and started the car, noticing that the sun was in the west, and I should do well to be out of the mountains by nightfall. I stopped by the orphanage and left the cabin key and money for my light bill with Miss Clark. And will you call Jerry for me to say goodbye to him? I don't know where he is, she said. I'm afraid he's not well. He didn't eat his dinner this noon. I mean, this kid is so sad he's not even eating. It's pretty sad. One of the other boys saw him going over the hill into the laurel. He was supposed to fire the boiler this afternoon. It's not like him. He's unusually reliable. So she said, he's saying he's not even doing his chores. And this kid was always like Johnny on the spot, taking care of things, making sure that any chore he had was completed. Even chores that weren't his, he did them. I was almost relieved, for I knew I should never see him again, and it would be easier not to say goodbye to him. I said, I wanted to talk with you about his mother, why he's here, but I'm in more of a hurry than I expected to be. It's out of the question for me to see her now, too, but here's some money I'd like to leave with you to buy things for him at Christmas and on his birthday. It will be better than for me to try to send him things I could so easily duplicate. Skates, for instance. Mariah, what are you doing? She blinked her honest spinster's eyes. There's not much use for skates here, she said. Her stupidity annoyed me. I love that line. Her stupidity annoyed me. I'll tell you why I love it in a minute. What I mean, I said, I don't want to duplicate things his mother sends him. I might have chosen skates if I didn't know she had already given them to him. She stared at me. I don't understand, she said. He has no mother. He has no skates.